Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 10 of an ongoing series focused on Configuration Manager, Current Branch, and the Microsoft Cloud, Azure. The focus of part 10 will be on Autopilot. But interestingly, this session also is a single session on Autopilot in the Modern Management series. And so as you'll see coming up, really, Autopilot is not typically thought of as being a config manager thing, but it absolutely can be. So that's why we include it here as part of the config manager current branch of the Microsoft Cloud series, but also have it as just an Autopilot series related to modern management. Enough said about that. Let's take a look at our agenda. Here's where we're going. What is Autopilot? Why do we care about Autopilot? The requirements, how it works, configuring it, getting it all set up. Then really want to show you some scenarios, demonstrate those, some places in which Autopilot's really been designed to solve certain scenarios. Wind up with some troubleshooting tips and tricks discussion. So what is Autopilot? Well, Autopilot is a Windows 10 solution. So everything we're talking about here is Windows 10 in scope. Right? Autopilot is a solution focused to simplify the process of preparing Windows 10 PCs for use in a production environment. Also, Autopilot focuses both on new devices and existing devices. In terms of new, right, the setup, the pre-configuring of new devices so that they're actually ready for production use. In terms of existing, being able to take those devices that are in the field, repurpose them, reset them, recover them, and configure them so that you can re-image, quote unquote, them with Autopilot. Autopilot works with bare metal and re-image scenarios. Now I put question marks there. Why? Because when you hear about Autopilot, you typically think about this as a brand new system out of the box, right? So these concepts that I mentioned there, bare metal, re-image, those are concepts that really apply in the imaging world. They don't really apply to Autopilot so much. You can kind of think through them, right? The closest equivalent in our vernacular talking about imaging would be the idea of pre-staged media. That's the closest comparison. But regardless of how you do it, whether you take an existing machine in the field or you have a brand new system that you're unboxing, right? The idea is these systems will already have a build of Windows 10 on them that the user will then step through the out-of-box experience. You'll see this in the scenarios and so on, right? So Windows 10 in all Autopilot scenarios is already on the machine in order to be able to Autopilot through. Now, it's not a configured version of Windows 10. It's a version of Windows 10 out-of-box experience, right? But anyway, that's where it stands differently from traditional imaging. So another really cool thing about Autopilot, there's no to minimal infrastructure required. What does that mean? Autopilot is cloud-centric, right? So we use various cloud services in bringing the Autopilot experience together. So Autopilot itself is the cloud service. There's other pieces that work alongside of it, such as the Microsoft Store for Business, Intune, certainly, third-party MDM providers, even Azure Active Directory. All of these are integral to making Autopilot do what you're going to see that it does, right? Also, configurations can integrate with other existing infrastructure. That's where I mentioned minimal infrastructure required. So if you have Config Manager, as you'll see, we can absolutely integrate with Config Manager. And then task sequencing in the cloud. I put a question mark there and put that in quotes. The reason I call that out, we've had a lot of experience with task sequencing over the years. We understand MDT, we understand OSD imaging. All of these concepts are pretty familiar. Autopilot is absolutely not task sequencing in the cloud. However, the end result of that process, Autopilot, can be the same as the end result of task sequencing. So again, to spell out, Autopilot is not task sequencing in the cloud. There are very notable differences, right? There is no task sequence, right? There is no such thing as a bare metal build. You can have a machine that's never been imaged before, that's not been specialized before, for sure, but it's going to start out at the out-of-box experience. Windows 10 must be on the system. Well, a version of Windows 10 that supports Autopilot. The new system can come from a retailer, it can come from an OEM. The repurposed system also, the system that we're using could also be a repurposed system that's been reset and so forth. You'll see all this. It'll come more clear to you as we walk along. And then finally, Autopilot is also a collection of technologies, right? So as we think about Autopilot, what do we need? We need Azure Active Directory Premium. We need Intune, or a third-party provider for MDM. We need Microsoft Store for Business. We quote-unquote need ConfigMgr. Let's be clear. ConfigMgr is not a required part of Autopilot. You can do Autopilot just fine without ConfigMgr, right? But in many environments that leverage ConfigMgr will be an integral part of Autopilot as we get started, at least. And so this little picture that I put down here, trying to do a little bit of wordsmithing here, just kind of shows all those components are woven together to deliver the service that we know as Autopilot, right? Okay, so why do we care about Autopilot? Well, several reasons, probably beyond even what I have here, but one of the reasons, efficiency, right? No need to re-image devices. No need, frankly, to have IT involved in the process at all. No IT touch of the device is required. The user's device is transformed on the fly, right? The user can obtain the device from anywhere as long as there is a base OS in place. Now, there's a caveat to it as well. The device needs to be registered as autopilotable in the Autopilot service. We'll talk about how to do that a bit later. But if you have a hardware vendor that wants to direct ship their device to the employee and have that employee have the out-of-box experience to open it up and so forth, you can do that, no problem. In some cases, retail purchase, no problem, right? Shipping the device to the employee by IT so they don't have to come into the office and so on. No problem at all. If there are existing devices that are out in the environment that you want to make them ready for and let them build through Autopilot, you can do that. One of the scenarios we'll talk about is taking Windows 7 devices and migrating them to Windows 10. At the time of recording of this session, we are staring down the barrel, if you will, of Windows 7 being out of support, right? And so there are a lot of organizations that still have Windows 7 that are looking at ways to try to get those devices to Windows 10 in the most straightforward way possible. I'll show you an option to be able to do that, right? It's modern, right? Autopilot is modern. Here we can preserve and convert an existing OS for production use. There is no requirement to wipe and load, which is so much a part of traditional imaging, at least with OSD and MDT, reducing the time investment required to build and customize the image. One of the big time requirements, if you will, of traditional imaging is the time required to lay down the operating system image itself, the operating system WIM, onto the hard drive. And then adding stuff in generally isn't the major time sink, if you will. There's a lot of variables around that. But since Windows 10 already has to be on the device, you can remove that entire time period of having to put Windows 10, on the device and so on, right? So that's, really cool. Autopilot, very, very capable. Through Autopilot, we can do things like automatically join into Azure Active Directory. We can automatically enroll in MDM management. Again, we think of Intune as we're talking about this, and you'll see demos of Intune. This could be a third-party provider if you wanted to. The automatic enrollment, there is a requirement for Azure AD Premium to do that, but it's absolutely a part of this and integral to making this work. Decisions around the administrator account, right? So if you think about building an operating system historically, whether it be Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows XP, whatever it is historically, if you step through Windows setup yourself, at the end of that process, you will be a local administrator on the machine. There's no way around that, right? You have to be, because you're the first user on that machine. Autopilot actually enables you as the administrator the option to allow a user to set up their device, yet when you get to the end of that out-of-box experience process, the user is just a local user, right? Any user who provisions Windows directly, let me say it again, historically will be a local admin, but Autopilot allows you to decide whether you want that user to become a standard user or an administrative user, completely up to you, right? Devices, configuration groups, profiles, all of these things can work together to give you a really, really cool picture of how your setup proceeds, right? So for example, you might have certain devices that, well, first of all, you may have all of your devices that you want to go through the Autopilot experience and have a certain base load of configuration. And then from there, you can figure out a group structure. Probably not going to go into that. In fact, we won't go into the details of that in this session. But you can figure out a group structure that would then recognize the device as being a specific use case kind of device and apply additional settings onto it, and profiles for settings enforcement. When I talk about profiles, I'm talking about Intune, in our case, profiles that you can use to configure and specialize the device, and so on. You can have custom out-of-box experience content. What does that mean? Well, that means that as we think about the out-of-box experience, the screens that we have to go through typically whenever we're setting up a device, those screens have historically been the screens that everyone has to go through. But here, you can streamline certain screens and only have a few minimal that have to be answered. Again, I'll show you, all of this as we go along. Again, why Autopilot? Innovation. This is where the innovation is going to be happening. And if you've paid attention to Autopilot as it's grown, right, we have a lot of innovation already there. Whenever I first recorded this video, it was only in one scenario that Autopilot was playing, and that would be the user-based deployment. Now we have a lot more that we're going to go through in this session, and so you'll see just as a result of that, the innovation that is happening and will continue to happen. And then finally, scenarios, right? Multiple scenarios that will help you meet your needs. I showed them to you on the agenda slide, what we're going to kind of go through and talk through and try to demonstrate to you. We will go through each one of those and detail them a bit later. Okay. So what are your requirements for Autopilot? Right? Well, one of them is that you need to register your device or have your device registered, right, in the Autopilot service and assigned to your specific organization. That way, when the device starts up and checks in with the Autopilot service, it will know, oh, I'm part of the XYZ organization, right, and then be able to apply settings appropriately and so forth. Now, there's a few ways that you can actually go about registering the device, and I will show you a couple of them. One of them I can't really show you. The first one is OEM managed. So this would be where you talk with the OEM that's providing your devices to you and have them go through and register the device in Autopilot, right? And that way when it's shipped, it's just ready to go. It can be a self-managed thing where through the Store for Business or through Intune, right, you can actually register these devices and make them present in the Autopilot service so that when they turn on, right, that they are recognized and so on. You can leverage Intune itself to automatically enroll devices that are existing already in Autopilot. I'll show you that here. I'll show you that now. Let me actually pull in Intune for just a second. This is not one of my planned demos, but since I have Intune up and it's probably easier to see, let me just pull it in. And so if I go to Intune and then I go to device enrollment and then finally Windows enrollment here, right, and then go through and look at my Autopilot profiles. So I do actually have a couple configured already. You will see them again a bit later, but just look at the user-driven demo profile and my properties. Okay, this will show me how I go through it. Well, one of the very first things is here. By default, this profile can only be applied to Autopilot devices synced from the Autopilot service. Convert all targeted devices to Autopilot, yes or no, right? And if I hover over information, what does that mean, right? And it says, what I'll summarize here. By default, Intune only applies this profile to Autopilot devices. Select yes to convert all targeted non-Autopilot devices to Autopilot. so that they can receive the profile the next time they perform a factory reset, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, by turning this to yes, this is where you can take all of your Intune managed devices and convert them to where they are injected into the Autopilot service automatically. And that way you don't have to go through scavenging the IDs that are required, and I'll show you in a minute, to put into the Autopilot service. It just goes ahead and does that for you. Now, these devices do need to be Windows 10, obviously, to be managed by the MDM component of Intune. But as long as that's the case, and your version 1709 or better in Windows 10, good to go, right? Well, just like there's an option here in Autopilot to be able to do these kind of things, there's also an option in ConfigMgr. Let me pull ConfigMgr in. Now, ConfigMgr is a little bit different than Autopilot. It's not quite as much of a streamlined thing, but it is nice to be able to grab this. And so specifically, if we go under monitoring, and look at reports, and then look at Autopilot, there is a new report added, or there is a report added. I forget which version of ConfigMgr added it, but it's been there for a little bit. That will show you your Autopilot device info. I can go run that, no problem. And it will, I don't have an exciting lab, so don't expect to see an exciting report here. But it will run the report and show you the devices that are with their hardware hash that can be autopiloted, right? So the hardware hash kind of a long string there, as you might expect, and there's other detail and so on. Well, this is all collected automatically by ConfigMgr, and then what you can do is you can go through and actually export this report, right, and get that into a format, an Excel spreadsheet or whatever you want, that would then be importable to the Autopilot service. And so even through ConfigMgr, for devices that have that hardware hash, you can absolutely pull that in and such these days really easily compared to what it was at the beginning. And you'll recall that I said, we are all about innovation with Autopilot, and that's absolutely true. And those are some of the things that have come in since I recorded version 1 of this, right? Anyway, and then other additional things that we might want to do would be things like company branding. So this is an optional thing. It is a recommended thing, but this allows you to customize the out-of-box experience so that at certain pages, your users will see details about your company and your logo, perhaps, and so forth, to make them feel comfortable that they're in the right place and they can enter their information accordingly and so on. This must be configured in Azure AD. I'll show that to you, right? Again, it's optional, but recommended. Another requirement is the supported operating system must be pre-installed. So devices must have Windows 10 1703 or later. Now, you want to be probably later than that because of some different things that come to bear as we go forward. Such as, one of them, I'll probably mention this again in a minute, 1709, I think it was, of Windows 10 is required for Azure AD authentication to really work. Actually, I'm confusing you. Sorry, ignore that. But yeah, you want to have the most recent version of Windows 10 you can to keep up with things and capabilities and so on. The supported operating systems that you can use include professional, enterprise, and education, and all of that must be pre-installed. You need Azure AD P1 or P2, Azure AD Premium P1 or P2, and then an MDM provider. So in here, in this discussion, we will focus on Intune as that MDM management provider, but it could be a third-party MDM management provider if you like. One thing that I will call out, very many organizations who are using Autopilot or using Intune will want to be in a co-managed configuration. The only way you can be in a true co-managed configuration is by using Intune along with ConfigMgr, right? You can be in a coexistence kind of scenario, but that has challenges of its own. So if you really want co-management, that does in fact require Intune, but Autopilot can be any third-party MDM provider that supports Autopilot as well as Intune, right? So FYI. Okay, so how does this work? Well, we're going to start to step into that, and you'll see more detail about how this works, but kind of in a generic overview sense of how this works. There's three real steps. The first step is to register the device in the Autopilot cloud service so that we recognize it whenever it boots up. One way is for the OEM to do that. So the OEM has what's called the Partner Center Admin Portal available to them. They can go through and get the required detail off the device and register in that portal. I've never seen it, don't have the need to see it because that's something the OEMs do. Won't be showing that here because, again, it's something the OEMs do, not you, not us, as IT admins. And then the second step is to use the Microsoft Store for Business or the Intune portal, could be either one today, to go ahead and register devices, new devices, for being eligible for Autopilot. The other thing that is inferred, I just talked about it, showed it to you, is there are those options in ConfigMgr and Intune to go ahead and take existing devices and register them in Intune as well. However you do it, then finally step 2, the device is provided to the end user at whatever location they are at, right? Either shipped by the OEM, provided by IT, and the end user grabs that device. Step 3, end user turns that device on, steps through the presented configuration screens. You choose what those are to some degree. I'll show that to you. Finally, the user signs into the device if you're using user-driven deployment, or a technician might proceed through the setup screens without signing in. That would be a self-deploying. Again, you'll see both of those. And then the device is Azure AD joined, it's MDM enrolled, it's provisioned by the MDM settings that you've configured, and off we go. And that's a very generic overview. I'll show you more detailed processes here in a moment. Okay, so let's get into the fun part of this and start demonstrating how do we set this stuff up. How do we go through and configure company branding and automatic MDM enrollment and device registration, and on we go. So for showing you that, let me pull back in my Azure portal and go back to my dashboard and specifically kind of work through it. So for company branding, if I go to Azure Active Directory, you will see a section down here called company branding, right here, right? And so I've done a bit of company branding myself. It's not real exciting, right? It's just some things to show you, right? And if I go and look, at that and look at the detail of it, just click on one of these elements here. So show the detail of it. You'll see different sign-in banners that I can put in, any image that I want to load up. Now be careful here because the image in your sign-in page has a maximum size and the banner logo has a maximum size. So you can't, unless they're both under 10 KB, you can't use the same image for both. And that took me a minute to stare at this before I finally realized what was going on. Other things like username hints, right? Sign in with Tailspin Toys username. That's what I put in there. Sign in page text, and so on. Just some different details that you can load in to make the user know that they're in a familiar environment, right? Other details here that will show you the background, the banner logos configured, and so on. That's all done here. Again, completely optional, but something that is very much worth doing. All right, and then while we're here, under Azure Active Directory, I'll show you this under Mobility, MDM and MAN. This is where you can go configure automatic MDM enrollment. So I have Intune, it's already configured. I could add others, so you can see the various third parties that actually support Autopilot. But since I'm using Intune, I'll go in. And here's the detail, right? Here are the MDM terms of use URLs. You don't really need to change any of this. The main thing that you need to worry about is which users you want to automatically join Intune. It may not be every user that you want to automatically join Intune, and that's fine. In my case, I've turned it to all users that sign in will automatically be joined into Intune, enrolled in Intune, I should say. I could say none, some, and then you would need to select a specific group of users that you would need to or want to have enrolled in Intune, whichever you like. But this is one place to configure that. This is the way historically we have gone, the place that we've historically gone in to configure that. Now, we also can go directly into Intune. Let me go back to the dashboard and set this up directly. So if I go to device enrollment, go to Windows enrollment, and then automatic enrollment, it'll bring you to the same screen that you were just at, right? And so, FYI. But still, either way, whichever works, those are the two ways to go and grab it. All right. Okay. Let me pull this back out of the picture. All right. So what else? All right. Third thing down is device registration. We've already talked about how we need to get the device registered in order to have it be Autopilot registered and autopilotable. There's two big broad categories of ways you do that. One is by letting the OEM do that, out of scope for our discussion, and then the other way is through IT. Well, there's several ways to do this, in IT. One I've already showed you in ConfigMgr and Intune. There are options to be able to grab the required hardware ID in bulk from devices that are already deployed, and then in the case of Intune, have that automatically ingested and written to the Autopilot service. In the case of ConfigMgr, be able to export it into an Excel format and then load that into Intune. But there's also the onesie twosie kind of ways that you can do for testing. So what I'm about to show you is primarily for lab testing. There's a PowerShell script you can run to grab the hardware ID and then push that up into the Autopilot service and so forth. And so I want to walk you through that. Then I will also show you the store for business and the Intune portion where you can take that hardware ID and that as an engine to push it in, right? So let me go through that one more time. So besides the bulk ways in Intune and ConfigMgr, there is the PowerShell method that will allow you to get onesie twosie the hardware ID from machines, and then we'll need to, once we have the hardware ID, we'll need to load it, right? So if you're using Intune in bulk, you don't have to actually load anything, it does it for you. If you're using ConfigMgr to grab the hardware ID and export to an Excel sheet, yeah, you'll have to import that into the Autopilot service yourself. If you're using the PowerShell script for kind of one-off testing, you'll have to import that into the Autopilot service yourself as well. And so the mechanisms for importing into the Autopilot service are one of three: the Partner Center Admin Portal, which is for the OEMs, which we're not going to talk about; the Store for Business, which we will talk about and show how to work it there; and Intune portal itself to be able to load this stuff up. Right. So let me walk you through for a minute how to actually obtain the hardware ID from a system running Windows 10 1703 or better. So this is, again, kind of for testing in your lab. And let me pull in a Windows 10 device. This is one that I will use for demo again here in a minute for user-based deployment. But let's use this for talking about the PowerShell script. So here we are at the very first screen that you would see whenever you boot up a machine that has a fresh load of Windows 10 on it, right? Now, a little bit of information. If a network connection is present already at this screen, then Windows 10 will have already checked to see if this particular device is registered in the Autopilot service. If it is not, then you will not get this machine to go through the Autopilot experience at all. You will have to make sure it's registered and then start the process over, and then it will go through. Now, in my case, this machine is already communicated because it's a virtual machine. I have an Ethernet connection to the internet, so it's already checked. In my case, it's already found that it is registered, and we would go through the Autopilot experience. But if you have not done that registration yet, you would not. Now, if you don't have a network connection screen here, you have the ability to grab that hardware ID, import it into Intune, and once that import it into the Autopilot service, and once that import is done, come back and start to move through the screens, ultimately set up a wireless connection, most likely, and then go through the Autopilot experience. Why do I tell you this? Because this process I'm going to show you is largely one that you will do in a lab-based scenario. This is also one that if I'm doing a presentation in front of an audience to talk about how to do this, it might bite me, because if the device is not already registered in the Autopilot service here, and you grab the ID and put it all in there, and then you expect it to autopilot through, it won't. You'll have to start the process over again, right? Anyway, to get the information at this page, all I have to do is press Shift F10, and that will actually open up a command prompt, right? And so what I can do here is just go into PowerShell, and there's a script out there that will help me retrieve the Autopilot hardware ID. The script is called Get Windows Autopilot Info. I don't need to get that script in advance. All I need to do now that I'm in PowerShell is tell PowerShell to install the script. Get Windows Autopilot, if I can type and talk at the same time, Autopilot Info, and do that. And so Windows will go out to the repository of scripts and grab it and pull it down into the environment. I have to hit yes a couple of times, I think, here. And then once we have that, let me hit yes again. Once we have that, we should be able to go grab the required pieces that we need. So it's getting it. All right, and then it's saying, hey, it's untrusted. It's okay. So we'll go ahead and download it. So it's grabbing it. Good. So now I have that particular script loaded in, right? Now, what I can do is run this script. Now, before I do that, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm allowed to run it. So I'm going to set my execution policy to unrestricted. So we're good here, and then now just simply run the script. And you're going to have to tell it where you want to output the file. And I will just put autopilot demo.csv. So we're going to go through and grab the information. We have that file, and so if I go to exit autopilot and go to, cd c:\/ and do a directory, I do actually have that autopilot CSV populated here. Now what I need to do is I need to make that CSV available so that I can import it into the Autopilot service. Here's a little bit of strategy discussion. So while you're doing this, if you do this, consider exporting your hardware hash to a file that instead of being stored here is stored on a network share, and do that directly. If you want to do that for multiple machines, right? You have 5 or 6 test machines you want to do this, you can export all 5 or 6 into the same file. Just make sure you use the -append option, and then you can just keep adding more files to that CSV. Once you're done, you can just bulk import it into Intune. In my case, I'm just going to net use to one of my servers and copy it. So I'll just do that and pause the video, do that, and come right back. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done that. You saw the process. You didn't have to watch me type it all, but I've copied it to my Z drive, which is actually one of the drives on one of my servers and so on. So I've actually got that CSV file that I can grab, and I can then import into the Autopilot service. All right. Now, how do I go about actually doing that? Well, let's take a look. So I'm done with this machine, at least for now. So I'm going to move this out of the screen and pull in my browser again. That is Intune, and I want to take you first to the store for business. So I'm going to log into the business store. So I have my own instance of the business store, and I can use that instance to actually sign in to my environment and then import this information. So let me do that real quick. All right. And you see the logo showing up in the back. Okay, so I've got the business store here. If we go to manage, so there's a lot about the store for business that we could talk about. We're focused on Autopilot, and so that's where we will be focused. And so if I go down to devices, Windows Autopilot, here I will see any devices that are in the Autopilot service that I've registered, all devices. I can split it out and look at the OEM registered devices, of which I have none, look at any groups I create, whatever. And this portal is very suitable for importing devices, creating and assigning deployment profiles to devices, and so forth. All I want to show you here is how you would go about importing devices. So I can click on Add Devices. And one thing I did while the video was paused is I actually moved that CSV file to my desktop so I can just look for that file. I've got actually this one right here actually. That's the one I moved. And here I can actually go and assign a group. Now, I don't have a deployment group, and the reason I don't have a deployment group is because I don't use this portal for my needs. I use the Intune portal, and the reason I use the Intune portal is because I have Intune. I think it's easier. So let's talk about that for just a minute. So if you have the Intune portal, I think it makes total sense to just use the Intune portal and don't worry about the store for business. But for those who have chosen to implement Autopilot without Intune, they still need to be able to manage devices, import them, and so forth, and this portal allows you to do that. So let me show you how I can do the same thing through the Intune portal. I'll just shift over here. On Windows Enrollment, scroll down a bit, I have the ability to deal with devices and deployment profiles. So on devices, you see the same 3 devices that you saw on the other. You see that I do have 3 deployment profiles assigned. We'll talk through that real quick, and so forth. But in the idea of importing, it's really easy. It's just a matter of import here. Again, browse to the particular file that you care about. And I've got, again, this one. It will look at it and tell you, okay, you're formatted correctly, because sometimes there have been issues with actually importing. So I'm not going to import because I actually have it already imported. But once you have the device imported, in order for that device to know how to autopilot, you have to assign an autopilot profile to the device. And so let me show you that part real quick. So if I scroll back over, you see the deployment profiles piece, and I do have 3 different profiles. All 3 of them are assigned. So I'll just go into the first one, user-driven demo profile. And if you look at the profile, you'll see just some different settings. So one of the things that's really cool with Intune is if you have devices registered, or enrolled, I should say, in Intune, then, and maybe you haven't imported them yet into the Autopilot service, then you could select here, go grab all of my Windows 10 devices that are enrolled and automatically import them to the Autopilot service, right? Then you have, and so it just happens automatically. Already seen that. And so here we have a deployment mode. So we have a couple of different choices. This one is user-driven. The other one is self-deploying, which we haven't seen yet, but I'll show it to you in just a minute. And then how we want the domain join to happen. So this will be an Azure Active Directory join, and I've got a couple of settings configured. So specifically, settings around the EULA, different privacy settings and so forth, hiding the change account options. I can specify what user account type I want. So this would be standard. There is also the apply device name template we'll talk about a little bit later that I can apply with this particular profile. Right? There are 2 others here that we will see in demos. So here's the self-deploying. Looks very similar in terms of properties. Right? So here, same thing. I've chosen self-deploying. It is an Azure AD join. And a little bit of difference. So you have a language here, and you have really, I think that's the only change as I look through it. And then finally, there is the hybrid Azure AD join, which means the device will be registered in Azure AD, but joined to your on-premises Active Directory. And so the same choices, user-driven, and then hybrid Azure AD, and then the configuration options similar, right? Except I can't use the device name template there. You'll understand why in a little bit. So back to the user-driven profile. So whenever you create the user-driven profile or any profile, in order for it to become active in Intune, you have to assign it, right? So I assigned it to a group, and let me talk about that for just a minute. Okay. So to get ready for this demo, I created 4 groups. One group is specifically to identify autopilotable devices, or devices, if you will, that are registered in the Autopilot service. So if I look down here, I have Autopilot devices with a ZTD ID. So when you import a device, whenever you register a device in the Autopilot service, it is assigned a ZTD ID. And that way, you can know it's an Autopilot registered device, and then you can also grab devices that do have a ZTD ID, group them together, and know which devices that we're talking about. So the way that I configure this is just a dynamic membership rule, and the advanced rule reads this way, right? Any device that contains a physical ID of a ZTD ID. So when you first import the device into Autopilot, it doesn't have a name, right? You can look at the members of this group and you'll find 3 devices. So one of them actually has a name. This is from my hybrid Azure AD join test, which I will go through in a minute. And once you have a name, then the actual name is reflected. But until then, you have GUIDs, right? That are the hardware ID GUIDs, essentially, that you import into the Autopilot service. And so I just show you the combination so you kind of understand how it lines out a bit. And so now that I have this, I actually need to, now you may just have this and that's enough because you want to use the same Autopilot deployment profile for everything. And so that would be a perfect solution. Just group your Autopilot devices into a group like this, target your deployment profile, and you're done. But I don't want to do that. I have multiple scenarios here. So I have the user-driven Autopilot. And so what I did there is I'm just assigning the resource manually here. So I just have one device there. I also have myself deploying with one device in it. And then I have finally my the hybrid Azure AD with one device, which has got a name now because I've been testing with it. All right. So that's a little bit about how things kind of get connected so that you can assign these deployment profiles and such. So let me go back. And another thing that I want to show you is the enrollment status page. So under device enrollment, Windows enrollment is where we access the enrollment status page. Now, you don't have to use it. It's completely optional, but it's really kind of useful. And the enrollment status page is this. So let me explain it by way of a scenario. So I had a customer that was starting to use this and really liked what they were seeing, but they had certain things that were a little bit time consuming, like BitLockering the device and so on. And the user was able to actually get in and use the device while Autopilot was still happening. And so they called me and said, is there a way to block the user from using the device to show them the status of what's going on with their device? Because we're getting calls to the help desk, why can't I get my mail or different other things that are blocked because BitLocker is not finished yet? And so the answer at the time was no, but very quickly we came up with this enrollment status page, which allows you to do exactly that. So if I click on the default status page and look at the settings, really easy, right? Do I want to show app and profile installation progress? Yes or no? Do I want to show an error after it takes a certain length of time or isn't finished in a certain length of time? By default, 60 minutes. What is that time, right? So in your environment, if it's 45 minutes, great. If it's 90 minutes, great, right? Configure that the way you like. Being able to configure a custom message when the error occurs. Allow users to be able to collect logs about the installation error and send them in. That's very useful for IT trying to troubleshoot a problem. Block the device being used until all apps and profiles are installed. In my case, I'm saying no, right? But in your case, you could say yes, and the user would not be able to even get to their desktop until all of the devices are deployed and so on, right? Okay. So let me show you a couple of things that I've actually configured in Intune so that we can see if those actually take place when we autopilot. All right, so I've got a couple of demo things done. So specifically, under, let me go back a little bit further. There, to the main page. Well, there, I'll just start over. So I want to show you some specific things that I need. So under my device configuration, I want to block manual unenrollment of the device. So here we go. Let's see, what do we have here? So I've just got this initial install, and I'm going to set a few things, right? So I've got sorry, got distracted. I've got these things. So if I go under properties and look at what I have configured, so you see I've got Windows 10 and later, I've got device restrictions configured. I have 8 of them actually configured. So let's go look at what they are. So loading that up. Okay, so I have my App Store, 16 settings available, and so on. And I don't have any of these configured. Here, Control Panel, I've got 1 out of 16 settings configured. So what do I have? Okay, so here, I am not allowing any system time modification at all, right? That's the only thing I've done there. So I scroll on down under General. And under General, I've got, again, 2 settings that I'm configuring. So I'm not allowing any manual unenrollment, and also I'm not going to allow Cortana. And then here under Password, I have 5 of 14 settings configured. So let's go look at those. All right, here I've just got some various configurations in terms of password length and so on that must be done, and so you get the idea. Just a few smattering settings that I want to enforce just to show Autopilot is doing its thing, and so on. In addition to that, I have a couple of applications that are out there. Actually, before I get to applications, well, I'll come back to that. So in terms of applications, I've got just a couple that I'm going to do. I'm going to actually install the ConfigMgr client as part of Autopilot. And so that gets into the whole cloud management gateway most of the time. Doesn't have to necessarily have the cloud management gateway little asterisk there, but the settings within it, the command line, well, I'll just show it to you. The command line within it will actually go through and install using the cloud management gateway options and so forth. So go to Properties, click Configure, and then scroll down. We will see the properties, which is this command line, which will actually take you to the Cloud Management Gateway directly to allow you to install the client if you are not on the internet, and so forth. Again, variations with the command line don't get stuck in that, but that's what I'm using. All right. So scrolling back over to my apps here, and then I also have other applications that I'm going to set up, such as Rich Copy is going to be here, and then Office will actually be here installed as well, right? So Office 365 will get installed as well. So just a few things to illustrate that Autopilot is working, and then finally back to device configuration. I had another profile that I created to install a trusted root cert. Right. If you want to do that, that's going to happen as well. All right. So all of these configurations to get ourselves ready for Autopilot to actually work. Okay. All right. Now, to get into the scenarios. So these scenarios will actually walk through in video pretty quickly, but in practice they'll take a little bit of time because I actually have to let the system build and so forth. All right. So the first one is the one that we started with whenever we first introduced Autopilot, and that is the user-driven deployment. Well, what does that exactly mean? That means the user is actually at the center of the deployment. It's that scenario where the user is shipped the device and they log on as part of the out-of-box experience and so forth. And this is a diagram that kind of tries to show how it works, and you'll see it work, right? So there's a couple of different phases of Autopilot. This is the Autopilot phase. This is the configuration with Intune phase, right? So the true Autopilot phase is really pretty brief. Then it's the configuration with Intune phase that we'll talk about. So how does this work? So basically the user receives the device, they power it on. The device is going to check in with the Autopilot service, that's the yellow line, checking in with the Autopilot service to find out if it's registered in Autopilot. The device is then confirmed as being registered as an autopilotable device subject to Autopilot servicing. The device receives the out-of-box experience configuration settings from the Autopilot service, and then the device continues through the custom out-of-box experience process, which you'll see. Then finally, we get to the end of that out-of-box experience process. The user is going to be asked to log on to the device. At that time, the device is is joined to Azure AD, and as a part of that process, is automatically enrolled in Intune. Once the device is enrolled in Intune, then Intune policies apply to the device. Intune status screen is applied if configured. The Intune will optionally deploy the ConfigMgr client, right? It could be a client that's remote and not on the corporate network and uses the cloud management gateway. Could be a client on the corporate network, which you would use standard client install if that's workable, which is what you see that I'm actually delivering down in my configuration, right? And then just a note, hey, consider co-management. And so at the end of this process, somewhere along the way, your system is going to be fully configured and ready for use, right? So it will be registered in Intune. You can have that device go through ConfigMgr and talk to the ConfigMgr infrastructure to get certain builds. In reality, you don't really probably have to wait for the entire time. In fact, you don't have to wait for the entire configuration. Somewhere along in here is when this part will happen, but just for graphical purposes, I showed it that way. Okay. So how does this actually work? Let me show you the configuration in Intune. Pull the Intune browser back in, navigate back to device enrollment, and then Windows enrollment. And I want to show you the user-driven. I just showed it to you, but I want to show it to you again since we're about to do that. So our deployment profile is here, and we have our user-driven deployment profile. The properties for that are right here. So I am user-driven, whatever. I've configured this, and so what to expect through this. So no EULA, I'm hiding that, hiding my privacy settings, or allowing change account options. I'm setting the account to be a standard account and applying the device template. Again, we'll talk about that more as we go along. So I've got the profile. Let me show you that it is assigned. So back to assignments. And I am assigning to that group I showed you, the Autopilot user-driven group. So I have the VM that we used for the PowerShell demo, and so let me bring it back into the picture. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of the command prompt, and I'm just going to step through the out-of-box experience like normal. And so answer that question, go on through, is this the right keyboard? Yes. I'm going to skip this. And you see I'm shortcutting the screens significantly, right? Now we have some setup to do, so very soon here I'll be prompted to sign in to the device. Okay, and so here we're at the sign-in screen, and I did, look, it's a video, so I'm trying to help you not have to spend too much time staring at processes working, so I did shortcut a few of those processes, but now I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And I'm going to make sure caps lock is not on. Okay, good. So I'm signed in. Username there. It's going to ask me for my password. Notice that it is keeping a reference to my my organization, Tailspin Toys, based on the customization. Oops, I did type in the wrong password, I realized. There, let's do that one. Okay. So it's going to go through, and very soon here, you should actually see the enrollment status screen pop up because I do have that configured for all of my users. Right? So off we go, and we are setting up the device. And here is my enrollment status screen. Now, I could continue anyway because as an administrator, I want to have that ability. But if I'm a user, I could block them totally, as you saw, and they wouldn't have the ability to continue onto the desktop. I can see status, right? Securing your hardware, joining your organization's network, registering your device for MDM. All of that's already been done. Now I'm doing my device setup, right? So security policies, these are the things that we have to do. You can see that these are not done yet, right? The account setup and so forth. So I'm just going to let it run, and it'll take time to actually provision these things. But again, through the magic of video, you won't have to wait and watch. So I'll just go ahead and pause this, and I'll come back as we move further along. Just peeking back in, we have progressed. 1 of 3 apps are installed. 1 of 1 security policies are applied. So not only does it tell you what's going on, it tells you progress along the way. 2 apps now installed. No setup needed, no setup needed. So we're good to go. And so we're continuing. Check back in. So I'm going to go ahead, and since we are this far, I'm going to go ahead and continue to my desktop anyway. So it's going to go through that. It will load my desktop and go through this experience, which I will shortcut for you. Okay, so it went through the process and came back to the enrollment status page. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and you notice it was complete with all the installation. So I'm now at the desktop. And so I'm just going to go check on a couple of things. It will be maybe a little bit sluggish still as we continue along, because we have a system that is still being configured behind the scenes. But let's see if we can go through some of this. So it said the apps were installed. So let's go look. So we don't have rich copy here yet, but it should be here shortly. Right. So let me go look at another one that should clearly be there by now, or at least starting. So if I look under File Explorer and look under this PC, C drive, Windows, I see CCM setup, right? So that's coming because I don't see the CCM folder yet. So it's not fully installed, but you can see that it's got the logs, it's working on it, and so forth, right? So it definitely got the command to install the client. Let's see under settings if anything shows up. Let me go there. Go home and go to accounts. This should be enrolled in Intune already. So access worker school. Look at my accounts. You can see connected to Azure AD. You also see info here, which tells you that it is enrolled in MDM. You see the areas managed by MDM are all of these that I've configured. So it's got these already. It's got rich copy. It's got the client bootstrap going on, so it recognizes those. So it definitely is rolling along. Oops, didn't mean to leave settings. Let's go back to it. Again, don't know if it's made its way through yet, but it should be in progress for sure. So let's just check one of them. All right, so back to accounts and access worker school. Here, I wonder, disconnect. So this hasn't been applied yet, so I can't unenroll, it doesn't look like. But it should be along the way pretty soon that it will do that, right? So let's just check back in on the status of software being deployed. So you see some different changes that are there already. Anyway, so you see the experience, rich tools, Microsoft rich tools are here. So that's rich copy that applied down from Intune. So it's making progress and so forth. So we'll just leave that to do its thing now that we've seen that. The key part about user-driven is that it is, strangely enough, user-driven, right? That the user does sign into it and so forth. Let me pull Intune back out of the picture and we'll move on to another demo. Next one is what's called self-deploying mode. So this specific mode is, think about kiosks that might exist in a retail scenario, restaurants or something else, where there's not really a user tied to the device. It's more just a device that needs to be used by multiple users, right? And whenever you deploy this, you don't want to have a user sign in. And so this process works very similarly, but there is one difference. So first, in order to do self-deploying mode, your device has to have TPM 2.0, right? Has to. Because we do, in this process, still have to have a way to authenticate to Azure AD. In the user-driven mode, that's the user account. In the self-deploying mode, that is a certificate that's in our TPM. So I am using a virtual machine for this, and so let me show you my VM. Here's self-deploying mode, and if I go to settings on that, you'll see that I have my firmware. Security is where I'm at to be, and my TPM is enabled. Right, so I'm good with that, and so that's how I'm going to be able to actually use this. Let me go ahead and pop in while I'm here, pull up my my VM, and I will minimize this. All right, cool. So how does it work? Here's the flow, very similar, but a little bit different. So the OEM or IT provides the device, or maybe it's a factory reset device, right? Whatever. The tech that's in the field, or the user, whoever, powers on the device checks in with the Autopilot service, finds out it is configured for Autopilot, receives the UBI configuration, and continues through. Now, the tech is going to click through the UBI screens. There is no user logon at all. The device, again, must have a TPM 2.0, which is used to authenticate in Azure, and the device is joined to Azure, automatically enrolled in Intune. The process continues just like before. You can have it config manager enrolled, no problem. So how does that work? So back to where we were, and now we have the self-deploying demo profile. And in terms of properties, it is not dissimilar. I've already seen it, right? Very similar, just self-deploying preview at the current status right now while we're recording this anyway. Language is selected by the end user, or you can choose one in advance from the drop-down or as part of the Autopilot profile. And then the rest. Still, we're going to have a standard user account and so forth. And then also, we have assigned this to our group for self-deploying, just like we demoed. All right, and so let's pull back in this VM that we have. So one thing I didn't mention, or isn't obvious, from here, is the user-driven demo. I was using Windows 10 version 18.03. For self-deploying, we need Windows 10 18.09. So let's proceed through the OEM setup pages like normal, and similar experience, at least at first. Select our keyboard layout, and then skip that, and then let it go do its thing here. Okay, and so here's where we see the difference, right? So it's kind of similar all the way through. But now no user account has been asked for. We're just going to go straight in and start to set up the device, right? So don't turn off the device is the prompt, and off we go. And this is self-deploying mode. So we'll let this device roll and check back in on it. Okay, so moving on from that and on to other stuff. And then finally to our familiar setup screen. And then it's all really normal, Autopilot. From here, we know what work we have to do, and securing the device, registering the device, on we go, and so forth, right? So I'll go ahead and pull this out of the screen for now, and we'll let that continue working. I'll pull this out of the screen as well. So what's next? Well, on to scenario number 3, which is a little bit of a twist on what we've already done. User-driven, but now we're going to do a hybrid Azure Directory deployment. So to be specific, what does this mean? So when we talk about Azure join, or sorry, joining a domain, we can either do it one of two ways. We can either join to Azure AD, in which case there will be no record of the machine in on-prem AD, or we can join on-prem AD, and that will result in registering in Azure AD. That's what we call the hybrid AD scenario, right? So just to say it another way, machines cannot be joined to both on-prem AD and Azure AD. They have to be joined to one or the other. So let's walk through the hybrid AD deployment scenario. So here's the graph, and it is a bit busier because this does have a few more moving parts than the previous ones. Similar kind of approach. So kind of walking through the graphic, and we'll see it work live. So here, again, this is a user-driven scenario blended with hybrid Azure AD join, or hybrid AD join, which is, again, Azure or Azure AD registered and on-prem AD join. So the scenario is that you have a device that is either OEM supplied, factory reset, supplied by IT, whatever. The user powers on the device. The device is going to check in with the Autopilot service in Azure, and we're going to see that that device is in fact registered in the Autopilot service and can be serviced. So at that stage, the device will receive the out-of-box experience configuration from the Autopilot service and continue through that customized out-of-box experience process. Now, once we finish that, the user is going to log into the device. This is going to be using Azure AD credentials, and the device registers in Azure AD. Now, if you actually watch this process, as the device joins Azure AD, you may see an indicator that it's actually Azure AD joined. It's not, right? Because of the way the process works, there is basically two records that will get created in a little bit more minutia than needed, but ultimately you will end up with one that is registered and for user policy and other things, right? So the device is automatically going to be enrolled in Intune because we have that configured, that when a device Azure AD joins, that it will get enrolled in Intune. So what's going to happen there, as soon as we're enrolled in Intune, the device is going to request through Intune, from Intune, using the connector. It's going to request to do an offline join, right? So there's a connector involved here. So you see this red line. So there's three steps. So the device requests from Intune to do an offline domain join. Intune itself is going to pass that request to the ODJ connector called the offline domain join connector. Another name for that, as you kind of see, is the name that's actually in the console is the Intune Active Directory connector. And then finally, the ODJ blob is going to get processed and passed back to the device so the device can actually do the offline domain join. So that's a lot of work or things to visualize in words. So we'll see it happen in a minute, but just to follow that process. So the device here, red line, is going to ask Intune, hey, I need to offline domain join. The connector is attached to Intune, so that will funnel the request in to our domain controller. That offline domain join blob will come back, and the device is going to receive that blob and process it, right? And then finally, once we get done with that, we're going to reboot, and then the user is going to be prompted for a sign-on. And at this point, this will not be an Azure sign-on. This will be a local Active Directory credential sign-on, right? Okay. And then after that, the process is the same. You'll have Intune policies applied to the device, and et cetera, et cetera. You can set up the Cloud Management Gateway as normal. Okay, so in terms of requirements, there are a few. So Windows 10 1809 is required for this to work. We do need the Intune connector for Active Directory, also known as the Offline Domain Join connector, ODJ connector in some cases you may see. There will be something called an Offline Domain Join blob, right? And then we do need a connection to CorpNet. So this is really, really important. there is no support for doing a hybrid AD join unless the machine has direct line of sight to an on-prem domain controller. Said another way, this is a process that requires the device to basically be on the corporate network. You can't do this through VPN, not supported at all, right? Through VPN, has to be able to see the domain controller. And by the way, as I mentioned, offline domain join, this is not a new concept. Offline domain join has been around for a while. It's just now we're making use of it in the Intune process for hybrid Azure AD join. So you might be familiar with the offline domain join command, djoin. And that command line, just to give you an example, this is the kind of command line I'm talking about. Just nothing specific here, but this is a command line that would actually produce an offline domain join blob that I'm referring to. The Intune process does this automatically for you, but just to call that out. So let's actually see this work in our demo. So this demo, pretty much straight by the book in terms of the documentation. Michael Niehaus also has a really good blog, a couple of them actually, on all things Autopilot, but specifically hybrid AD join. He has a real good blog on that, kind of showing the details. Some of that I'll show you, as we go along. So the first thing is that we need to go about preparing Active Directory so that we can publish all of these potential hybrid AD join machines into Active Directory, join those computers to Active Directory. So a point on that. Domains have a built-in limit, by default 10, that applies to all users and computers that aren't delegated rights to create computer objects, right? The procedure, let me spell that out. So Active Directory will only allow individual users and computers to be joined up to 10 times, right? You can only do 10 times. But if you actually delegate the right that allows creating computer objects, we can increase that number. That's what we're going to do in this procedure. So this procedure specifically grants the computer that's hosting the Intune Active Directory connector, or the ODJ connector, grants that system the right to create computer objects, which effectively is going to bypass the default limit of 10. Now, in my lab, I'm not going to exceed the limit of 10 anyway, but worth calling out, because in a production environment, that certainly will be important. So let me pull in one of my 2 domain controllers to the screen, and we'll walk through that process. So opening Active Directory users and computers here. Administrative tools, Active Directory users and computers, right there. So what I'm going to do, now here's a decision point you can make. I'll show you how to actually create an organizational unit specifically for the purpose of holding machines that are hybrid AD joined. So you really have a choice. You can create a specific OU for that, or you can just not have a specific OU, and the machines will get created in the default OU, which in this case is the computers container. So you see that I have a container that I've created for hybrid Azure AD computers. Now, in my lab, I'm not going to use that. You'll see that more in a minute. But if I wanted to delegate rights to this container, what I'm going to do is just simply right-click and select Delegate Control. Right? Now, in the wizard that comes up, I'm just going to step through Next, and then I want to add a computer object. Okay, so first thing I have to make sure of is that computers is selected here. Hit OK. And the computer object that I want to add happens to be the peer domain controller for this one, DC1. Actually, both my domain controllers have this connector, in full disclosure, but either way, you want to make sure you add the computer or computers that host this connector. And a note about that too, you can run with just one connector, that's fine, but we do support multiple connectors just for fail-safe and scalability and so forth. So I'm just going to check the name here. All right, hit OK. And if that's all I have, I can just stop there. And again, I have mine on 2 DCs, but I'm not going to use this OU, and so I'm just going to move on from here. So once I have that, I'll click Next. And then what I want to do from here is I want to go create a custom task that I want to delegate, right? Click Next. And so specifically here, what I want to do is say only the objects in this folder, and then I want to say computer right here, computer objects, because that's ultimately what this connector is going to be doing, is creating computer objects. Then I also need to check create selected objects in the folder and delete selected objects in the folder, so I can do both as needed. Click Next from there. And then I need to give full control, which makes all of the other checks show up. So that's done. And then after that, finish. So now I've effectively created the delegation that I need. Now, again, I'm not going to use that container. You'll see mine, actually, my demo machine in a minute, show up under computers, but just to show you how to go through that delegation. So now that I have that, I'm going to go through a process to install this connector, right? Now, I've already got the connector installed here, but I will show you how to go about obtaining the connector. So let's go back into Intune and find the connector. So if I pull in Intune web page, I'm going to go back to the beginning, go to device enrollment, and go to Windows enrollment. As soon as that comes up here, there we go, Windows enrollment, and you will see down here this Intune connector for Active Directory. It says in preview mode right now, but this is where you go and you can click on Add, and that will give you a download link to go and download the connector. So once you do that, it's really, really easy. In fact, you see that I have two connectors here, and this error is actually not correct. It's old, as you can tell, so it hasn't. This is whenever I was actually messing with the connector and adding it and removing it from a computer. But now it's live, on both of these. So let's remove this. And so once I have the connector installed, and it's a really easy, just MSI setup, just ODJ connector here, and you'll see that in my case it's already installed as I run this, right? So I can uninstall it, repair it, whatever. But when you install this, the only thing you're going to really need to do is sign in to your Intune environment. And here it is installed here. So let's just go ahead and open it up. All right. So all you're going to have to do is sign in to your Intune environment, and that will establish the connection. And you see that I've already signed in, so that's grayed out. There's also some proxy information on here if you need that you can input, but that connector's out there and it's running. Now, one word about this connector. Well, two words about this connector. It may take a minute or two, a couple of minutes maybe, for this connector to show up as active in Intune. So you want to come back in this page, refresh, and just make sure that the connector is active on whatever systems that you expect it to be running on, right? Which gives you a good sense that everything's healthy. Another thing about this connector. So I've already mentioned in the diagram that the autopiloting device will request the offline domain join blob from Intune, and then the connector picks that up and services it and sends that information back to Intune. We can monitor that connector and see that it's pulling the information and making the blob available and so forth. So there's ways we can see how that connector is running, and that connector is a pull. Right, it's a pull from the domain, or in my case, the domain controller I've installed it on, to Intune. So if you have multiple, you'll just have connectors out there that can trigger and pull requests as they come in, and again for load balancing and so forth. Right, so let's pull this back up. All right, and actually I need to keep Intune in. Let me get rid of the DC, and so let me pull back in Intune for just a minute, because I want to show you the configuration for this. All right, so for the deployment profile, here's my Azure AD join and the properties for it in terms of the configuration. So you see that it is user-driven, it is hybrid Azure AD joined, and in terms of configuration, very easy. Similar configs. The only thing we can't use is the apply device name template, because there's another way that we can templatize, if you will, the device name and such that will be reflected when the device joins. And then in terms of assignments, this is assigned to the group here, right? So we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and remove this from the environment. And now I want to pull in my VM. Actually, one more thing before I do that. I always forget this because it's unique to this scenario. So in terms of Autopilot for hybrid AD join, we also need to create a policy, a configuration policy for the device. So if I go to device configuration, you'll see under profiles that I have one for hybrid AD join. And there's a specific setting for this. And if you go in, you'll see Windows 10 and later domain join preview is where it is. And there's a couple of settings that you can configure. So there's 3 here. This one is completely optional, right? So the computer name prefix, so this is how the device will appear when it joins AD. Just give it the prefix, and then there will be random characters assigned at the end, what the domain name is. And if you are specifying an organizational unit, give the name of that organizational unit. But it's not just the name, it's the name in the fully qualified path kind of name, the CN equals and the DC equals and so forth. That's how you expect to enter the data here. I mentioned I'm not using that specific OU. I'm just going to let it use the default OU, thus mine is not configured. Right, and then I have this also deployed, this particular policy assigned to the same group right here, user-driven hybrid Azure AD. So with all that done, now I'm ready to pull in the virtual machine. All right, now in full disclosure, this process takes longer than the other 2 I've shown you so far. I'm going to short circuit it a bit and not going to make you wait for everything. So we're just going to say yes and go on. And select the keyboard layout and hit skip. Okay, so we have the welcome to Tailspin Toys, so we know that the Autopilot deployment profile has been applied. So let's sign in to Azure AD at this stage. All right, and then enter the password. And let a little bit more processing go on. All right, and so now we are doing a reboot here, and then we will see what happens when we come back up. Okay, and so now we see that we have the enrollment status page that's come up. We haven't signed in yet. Give it a second, and now let's see what happens. And we are now at the sign-in screen. So no reboot there, right? Just one reboot so far. Now I'm going to sign into the on-prem Active Directory domain. And let that process. All right, and now we are rebooting again. Well, not rebooting, but reconnecting to my VM here now that Windows 10 has progressed far enough in the logon to need that. All right, so let's reconnect to the VM here, which will, in my case, require a logon. And so we should have the enrollment status page coming up here in just a minute. And there it is, right? So I'm going to go ahead and short circuit it here because right now all we're doing, we have our device prep, so all that handled. The device setup's complete. Now we're working on the account setup, right? And so this is going to take a little bit yet. So we'll go ahead and pull this out of the equation, but that is the Autopilot process for hybrid AD join. And one last thing here. So we saw all that work. Now, how do we go about verifying it? What kind of visual clues or logging clues, if you will, do we have that things are progressing okay, specifically around the connector? So let me pull in one of my two DCs that has the connector on it. And so this is one of the two, and I've opened up the event log, and now that I have the connector installed, I have this thing called ODJ connector service log. This is a kind of a busy log because it will go out and log events every so often as it goes out and checks. So what I've done is I've filtered to remove these two events, and that leaves me with just the good stuff. Again, that's documented in Michael Niehause's blog. But if you look, you can see the basically activity as we go along. You see hybrid AD dash, so I prefix my computer name hybrid AD, and then this is just a random string of characters, whether my blob is encrypted, all the different things, diagnostic codes, other things. So just really good event log information here to say what's going on. And then if I go look in Azure AD, now I said Azure AD. If I look in Active Directory on-prem, again, I'm not using this container, I'm using the computer's container. And so if you look in here, I have the hybrid AD computer account, which was created in my on-prem AD by the connector. And then finally, if I go pull back in my Azure portal and look at devices, so I have two views into devices. One is all devices, and then these are specifically Azure AD devices. So if I look at all devices, I will see, in fact, a couple. This is from testing, so I don't actually have this many, but I do, in fact, see the one that I'm messing with. And if I go look at Azure AD devices, then search for hybrid. See if I can do that. Here is my one device. Let me go edit some columns so I can see a little bit better. So get rid of enabled, OS, version, owner, MDM, don't care, compliant, don't care, registered, don't care. So that hopefully will give me some column space. And go over here. So again, it shows Azure AD joined. It's really not. So again, this record, there will be two records in here eventually. This is an enabled record, so it's still actually in process a bit, but you see it in here, and so that's a good indicator that things are complete for the Azure or for the hybrid AD join scenario. And then finally, our final scenario, and that is autopiloting existing devices. And so what this is really all about is are those scenarios where you have Windows 7 devices that you need to transition to Windows 10 and make them autopilotable or build them through Autopilot. So what are the requirements? First, again, Windows 10 1809. The boot images in ConfigMgr, because ConfigMgr is a key part of this, based on Windows 10 1803 or better, you're going to have a task sequence. And then Intune configured to redeploy the apps that are necessary. Another not requirement, but something that's really helpful is OneDrive, right? Being able to have OneDrive so that you can take away and store safely the user's data, and then whenever the machine is built into Windows 10, it can then just reconsume that data. If you didn't have that, you could actually use the task sequence to migrate your user data with USMT as well, and then bring it back and so forth. Now, a little bit more about the task sequence. So how does the task sequence work to make this magic happen? So basically, the task sequence will start in Windows 7 and scrape data that's needed, and then it will actually lay down Windows 10 onto the device. Do a wipe and load, lay down Windows 10 onto the device. There's a process that will place a JSON on the device. That JSON is going to describe the autopilot profile that you want. Also, there's a process that will register the device with Autopilot so it works whenever Windows 10 first starts up. Also, we will delete the default unattended XML because it gets in the way. And then once the system starts back in Windows 10, then it will be ready to go for Autopilot. Really a pretty slick solution. I mentioned task sequence. I also mentioned, I think I said ConfigMgr. You can do the same thing with MDT, right? No problem there at all. So here's how it works. So the task sequence is going to be deployed to and executed on the existing device. The task sequence deploys and configures Windows 10 for Autopilot. The system will then reboot into the Windows 10 Autopilot experience, which will then take the user through the same kind of experience that they had. So here I mentioned that we reboot. Could just power down, ship it to the user at that stage. The user powers on the device, device checks in, realizes same kind of before as we have done already, goes through the UBI experience, user logs onto the device joins Azure AD, it's automatically enrolled in Intune, policy comes down, and so forth. So what happens is the task sequence is deployed to and executed on an existing Windows 7 device. That task sequence deploys and configures Windows 10 for Autopilot. When I say configure, it's going to drop down a JSON. That you have to configure the JSON externally, which I'll show you how to do that. And then it drops that JSON on the device. That JSON will say which deployment profile needs to be executed against the device. There's a process also that registers the device in Autopilot so that whenever Windows 10 does actually come up the first time, that it is autopilotable. And then the system reboots into Windows 10 Autopilot experience, or you can just shut it down at this stage. Ship it to the end user, whatever, right? There's some options there. And then everything proceeds like normal. The user powers on the device, or maybe it was just rebooted, checks in with Autopilot, sees that it's autopilotable, receives the UBI configuration, moves on, user logs onto the device is joined to Azure AD, device automatically enrolled in Intune, policies come down, etc., 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 kind of like we've seen before. So let's walk through this a little bit in a demo form so you can see how it works. So for the demo, a couple of things. We will need to actually get the list of deployment profiles from Intune, right? So what I'm going to do is just open a PowerShell prompt. I'm going to use ISE just because I like that better. And I'm going to walk through, I'm going to install a package provider. And the name will be NuGet. And the minimum version will be 2.8.5.201. I'm going to force that. So it's going to run through. This does need to be run as an administrator, by the way. And then after that gets done, I need to install the Azure AD module just to make sure that we have the command sets that we need from there. Okay, so we have that. Let's install module Azure AD, of course. So we'll get that downloaded. And it's loading down. So that's done. All right. And then I need to install another module. And that's Windows Autopilot Intune. I'm going to force that. So that's installing, and that's finished. And then finally, I'm going to connect Autopilot Intune user. That will be feedback. There, and then I'm going to have to sign in with Intune. Great, so now I'm there, and now finally, with all that done, my whole point is to get the Autopilot profiles, and I need to convert those a JSON. Pilot configuration JSON. Done. So converting that out, and so here it is. That's actually written out, right? So once I have that, then I can select my deployment profile, and what I'm going to do actually is I can take the whole thing. Notice that it's just bracketed, or I can pick the one that I want, the profile that I want, and just take that out. So I'm going to highlight just the profile that I want for this. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to save it. Now, so from this point, let me pull in the ConfigMgr server, because all the rest of this is in the ConfigMgr server. So I'm going to take PowerShell away, go ahead and get rid of it, and grab the ConfigMgr server, pull it in, because I've already actually created the file. So if I go to my C drive, I'm going to deploy this through the task sequence, so I've gone ahead and put it in my package source folder called an Autopilot. Here is that JSON file. So just the extracted portion that I wanted, right? Just that. And so I also have a script here that will go through and modify that JSON. We'll talk about that in just a minute, right? So I've got the deployment profile. It's ready to go. And so I can go forward and build the task sequence to deploy this thing. Now, a word about the JSON file. It does need to be in either ASCII or ANSI format, right? It must be named Autopilot configuration file JSON. It can't be named anything else, otherwise we won't recognize it and it won't work. Now from here, all I need to do is actually go create a ConfigMgr package. Well, not all I need to do. I'll start with that. So I'm going to go to my application management and go to packages. And what you'll see is I have my Autopilot JSON package. I do not have any programs. All I'm using is this package for is to point to my source directory. Right here, data source, that's my source directory. That's it. That's all I'm doing to define that package. And then I need to create a collection that I'm going to be deploying this to. So I actually have that created already. So I'll just go ahead and go to the task sequence. I'll show you the collection here in just a minute. So here's my task sequence. Now, so the task sequence, again, this has to be Windows 10 1809, so the task sequence will deploy Windows 10 1809. Here's two of them, actually. I'll show you the difference in a minute. The apply image step will apply the WIM image, not the Windows 10 upgrade package. So this is upgrading to Windows 10 through Autopilot, but to get that done, we're actually applying the Windows 10 WIM, right? And then as we do this, so we need to import the WIM directly from the media. Right? You could customize the WIM, right, to have some things in it whenever you customize or bring it into the task sequence, but that adds complexity that really probably should avoid. The process that we're going to go through will actually wipe and load. Mentioned that already. It's not going to be a true upgrade to Windows 10. It's going to be a wipe and load, positioning Windows 10, making some of the adjustments, preserving data by USMT or using OneDrive before the deployment proceeds, and then we will go through, right? Okay. So if I go into task sequence, again, there's two task sequences here. The way I did this is just a standard task sequence, right click, create a task sequence, select deploy Windows Autopilot for existing devices, right? This is now a setting that's in here, okay? So it helps build things for you. In MDT, I didn't see the equivalent of this, but I did get a task sequence built that does the same kind of thing as what we have going on. And so walk through the wizard and select the different pieces. I'll just put in some details so we can walk through the wizard. Then I'll show you my task sequences. So import the image package, the ConfigMgr client, any updates you want to install, so on. Very simple task sequence at the end of the day. This one is Michael Niehouse's version called the Streamline task sequence. This is the task sequence that Rob York talks about in the official documentation. So I will just edit this one to show it to you, and then I'll focus on the one Michael Niehouse does. So essentially what we're doing is we're restarting in PE, we're applying the operating system, Windows 10, we're applying the Autopilot configuration, and then doing the device drivers, do our setup Windows configuration manager. We're going ahead and prepare. So we're going to sysprep the thing, and then off we go. Really, I can't imagine a scenario where sysprepping is really needed. So the streamlined testing was just what I typically work with exclusively, and it looks like this, right? Just restart in PE, do the partitioning, apply your OS. That one I had is some demo, so I can actually delete that because it really doesn't matter now. There's an apply JSON step where I can use the PowerShell script provided. So let me pull that back up. So if I go to package source and then Autopilot, here is an adjust the JSON PowerShell script. It's actually very easy. Open it with Notepad just to show you how easy it is. Really simple. It takes the content and it's going to basically append the name of the machine that you're imaging, and then also, well, that's really it. It gets the machine name, so I just have a random string of text as my machine name, and then it adds the cloud assigned device name to the JSON file. It re-outputs the JSON file, and off you go. So you don't have to use this, but if you want to preserve that Windows 7 computer name, you need something like this, right? And so that's why I'm just running the PowerShell script here. The PowerShell script points at the JSON file that's needed and so forth. Apply your device drivers, get rid of the unattend file, and then restart the computer into Windows 10, right? And in some cases, you don't even really need that restart step. But that's constructing the that's constructing the task sequence that you need, and it's really that simple. And then off we can go. So let me pull this. Actually, let me show you that I actually have this deployed. So I do have a deployment. It's to my Windows 7 machine, my collection, Windows 7 to Windows 10 deployment. It's available. And so let's pull this out of the equation and go see it work. And on my Windows 7 machine, let me pull that in. Software Center ready to go. Have my streamlined version. So I'm just going to install that, kick it off. Yes, I know it's going to image. That's great. So the task sequence will begin. We'll watch it for just a minute. So downloading and installing software, task sequence engine should kick off here. It has. Restarting in Windows PE just like it should. And then in PE, we should come up and deploy Windows 10. Now, what you're not seeing me do here, because I don't need to for the demo, I'm not doing anything about the user's data. You would want to do that maybe in the case of your users in Windows 7 to make sure that they have the same data and experience applied there. I'm also not doing anything about applications in Intune. Remember, whenever we get Windows 10 deployed on here, it will go through and autopilot, so all the apps will need to come back down through Intune. If you have ConfigMgr in the mix and co-management and already configured there, then you can use ConfigMgr to get those apps redeployed too. But anyway, just FYI. So we will let it do its thing here for a minute. All right, almost finished putting Windows PE on, and then we should reboot into Windows PE. Got the shutdown. I'm going to go ahead and let it restart now. And when we come back up, we should be in Windows PE. All right, loading files. PE is coming up. All right, and so the task sequence just continues like normal. Okay, so now it's partitioning the disk, and it's going to do its normal task sequence stuff and lay things down. I'm going to go ahead and hit F8 because I want to stop this thing before it actually reboots so we can take a look at a couple of things. So we'll let the image lay itself down and take a look at what happens. Okay, so imaging is done, and I did keep my command prompt window open so we could see what was going on. So let me just go down to C drive. And I've already checked it out there, right? But if you go to this path, Windows Provisioning Autopilot, and do a directory, you will see that that JSON file has been placed here, right? And the other place that we want to check is under Panther. So let's see. There, unattend. The unattend file is gone. Right, so we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down and let it reboot. And that should come up, and the screen we should see is Autopilot, and we should be able to also see that, is the UBI screen for Windows 10. And the screen, as we go through that, we should also see this system is now configured for Autopilot, right? And so on. So we'll let this boot up here for a sec. So we're at the setup screen. Let's just go through this like before. Choose the keyboard layout and then skip this and see what happens. And like expected, we are asked to sign in to tailspintoys.com. So the process worked out well. Windows 7, information stored, even though I didn't do it, information stored for the user. Rebooted, Windows 10 laid down like normal, JSON inserted, unattend.xml removed, and then Windows 10 boots up, goes through the process just like normal. Now we're at an autopilot screen, and so on, right? So good to go. Let's go ahead and remove this from the picture and move on. Now, before we continue into the next phase of the discussion, I do want to pull back in one of my devices and show you the progress along the way, right? I'm not going to show you every single thing, but there were a few configurations I showed you at the beginning of all of this that I set. It's the same for really all the devices, but this is the first one we did, the user-driven, right? And so just to check in on a couple of things, one of the configurations I made is to install the trusted root certificate from my certificate authority on the device, and so that is right here. So it actually got installed as a part of the build process in Autopilot. And then also one of the other things that I set is to disable the ability to set Windows time. So we're going to go to the change the date and time and look, and you'll notice that everything's grayed out. Right? I can see the settings, but I can't do anything about the settings. Another few things that I did was to install 3 pieces of software. One was Office 365, so if you scroll up and down, you see that Office 365 is in fact installed here. Another one was Rich Copy, so if I look at here, Rich Tools, it is in fact installed. The third one is ConfigMgr client, so if I just look at the disk, I did see anyway that the ConfigMgr client started to load. It didn't finish, but at least it got started. Didn't really expect it to finish. I know that there's an error with the way I have it set up right now, but nonetheless, showing you that it did actually get started, and so on. Right, so I wanted to show that to you, and such as we kind of wrap that up. All right, so another scenario is white glove. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this, show you how it works. Really similar to what we just did, but has a few little nuances in it. Want to show you what it is, tell you what it is. So specifically, white glove is the scenario where historically, maybe with imaging, organizations might have had build depots, places where they would build lots of machines and then ultimately ship to the end user. This is similar to that. So for example, you might have IT or these build depots actually build your Autopilot machines partially, right? So I'll explain partially in a minute. You might do that. You might have partners that do that, right? You might actually offload that to the OEM. So effectively what white glove does is it will split the build process into 2. The idea is that the bulk of it will be done by IT or your partner or your OEM. That's the longest build time. And then when the user actually gets the device, yes, there will be some things that need to be configured, but that should be the shortest build time, right? So I'll say this again. In the portion that the IT department does, or the OEM or the partner, that would be the way you would set this up is all the policies and so on targeted to the device itself. That should be the bulk of it. Then when the user gets the machine, they will turn it on, go through a couple of things, log into it, and then they will receive user-targeted policy at that point, right? But that should be the shortest part of it. So I lifted this diagram from one of our docs where just basically trying to say the OEM is going to provide the Windows image and the driver. The OEM partner or IT will provide the device apps, settings, policies, user apps, basically the configuration to the device. And then the user, when they get the device, user settings and policies specific to the user will be applied, right? So what are the requirements for white glove? Well, we need Windows 10, 1903. We do need a profile, an Autopilot profile that is user-driven and supports either Azure AD Join or hybrid Azure AD Join. It is required for white glove that you have physical devices. That won't be an issue in most cases. It is an issue for me. So I will tell you, I will show you white glove, but what I'm going to show you will fail But that's okay, right? I'm telling you that in advance because I'm using a VM for the ease of demonstrating this to you. Also, it's not bad that it fails because I can show you a couple of things at the failure window too. You'll need a device that has TPM 2.0, will support device attestation, right? And then another thing, Ethernet is required. Wi-Fi, wireless not supported. This is really due to the fact that when the user gets the machine, they're going to need to choose a language, a locale, a keyboard, in order to make that Wi-Fi connection, right? So you want to make sure that you have Ethernet because that is required. Okay, so how does this work? So I've taken the same diagram I've used so far and kind of changed it a bit. So you're going to have an OEM supplied or factory reset device. Your IT partner or OEM is going to power on that device. The device checks in with Autopilot service just like normal. Device is confirmed that it is configured for Autopilot white glove servicing, and then the device receives the UBI configuration from the Autopilot service just like normal. So when the device turns on, the first screen you're going to get is the first UBI screen. At that screen, it's really important that you don't just click yes or answer the question and move on. If you answer the question and move on at that stage, you're not getting white glove. You're going to get a user-driven type of experience, right? Which is okay if that's what you want, but if you want white glove, at that initial screen, you have to press the Windows key 5 times, and that's going to pull up a different screen. What I'm calling the white glove screen, it has a couple of different options in there. You can go through the white glove process, and as a part of that process, the device automatically enrolls in Intune, and then at the point that it enrolls in Intune, it's going to start getting device targeted. So I kind of bolded this. Device targeted policies applied to it, not user based. We don't know who the user is right now, right? And then in the enrollment status page is going to display just like normal what's going on. You'll actually get a status page here too, not the enrollment status page, but one that has a QR code and some identifying information and so on. And then as the Intune build continues, you're going to either finish successfully or in a failed state. If you're successful, your screen is going to turn green, and at that point, the device is powered off and shipped to the user. If it is a failure, the screen is going to turn red. You're going to have the option to do diagnostics or retry, right? And then once you're done, the system is fully configured. Basically, shut it down, send it to the end user, right? You might have installed some things to your cloud management gateway and so on at that point, but shut it down, send it to the end user. Then the end user gets it, right? The end user powers on the device and will answer a couple of UBI screens and will sign into the device. Then Intune user targeted policies are supplied, and off we go. The device is fully configured. So let's actually go see this work, right? And the first thing I'm going to do is start off in Intune and show you just the basics. So really the process is essentially the same as what we've seen. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but let me go to device enrollment. Registration, exactly the same as it always has been in all the other scenarios. And so under Windows enrollment, I'm going to go to deployment profiles, and I have an Autopilot deployment profile or a white glove deployment profile configured here. And so the only real difference is, well, let me just do it fresh. Let me just do a pretend fresh one. I've got the white glove there, but let's do it from scratch. So I'll just do something here, click next, and then I answer the same question, either user-driven. So user-driven is what you want, and then you decide how you want to join Azure AD, and then you answer this question. Allow white glove, yes or no? No by default, yes if you want white glove, and then you continue on. And that's it in terms of configuring the deployment profile, right? Then you need to configure the settings that you're going to target to the device. Again, there's a split here. You're going to target configurations to the device because those are the ones that are going to be applied during white glove. And you're going to want to try to put as much configuration as possible here because these are the configs that will be applied before the system shipped to the end user. These are the ones where it might take you a little bit more time. So front load these and absorb the time before the user actually gets the device. These configurations really could be most anything. Certs, security templates, settings, software, whatever. So decide what you're going to put in that device targeted, and then also decide what you're going to put into user targeted after the user gets the device. All right. So now that we understand that, let's get Intune out of the picture. Yep, I will leave. And pull in a VM that is effectively ready to go. If I can find my mouse, there it is. Effectively ready to go for white glove. So this machine right here. Okay, so this is the very first out-of-box screen. Now I could just hit yes, and if I've done that, I've blown past the white glove experience. Instead, what I'm going to do is press the Windows key 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? And that's going to bring me up a screen that will give me 3 options. One will be allow installing a provisioning package or reset the device, but the one I'm after is Windows Autopilot provisioning. So it's going to go through a few things here, check in with the service, ultimately get a deployment profile, provide you some information here in a minute. That's a QR code, so really good for a build center to have a QR code there that can be scanned. It will talk about the profile that has been selected for this device. If there's been any user tied to the device, then we'll list that on the screen that's coming up, and also the organization. So we'll let it spin for just a minute, and then we will have the screen that comes up. Let me just give it a second. Yeah, looking for more updates. And just a moment. I'm trying to not pause the video because I want to show the whole process. It shouldn't be that much longer. And we will be presented with the screen. There it is. Good, good, good. So we'll get a QR code right there, right? And so the organization is identified. The deployment profile is identified. The user, there is no user associated. Now, I could cancel it or do whatever, scan the QR code if I want to retrieve the info, whatever. But I'm just going to go ahead and say provision. Now, I'm going to get the enrollment status page here. I will tell you this is going to fail, again, because I'm on a VM. But that's okay, right? Because at this stage, it's going to fail because I can't get the TPM, all that stuff working correctly on this particular VM. You'll see a red screen in a minute. I'm not going to make you wait for that. I'm going to pause the video in just a minute. But from here, you can see all the stuff that's going on, what's being configured. You can see what the failures are. So I'm just going to let it do its thing, and I will come back when the red screen pops up and show you the failure, and we will be done. Be right back. Okay, so we have the red screen now, and so it failed. Told you it would, right? Same information that we have. We have a QR code, but now I have a couple of choices. I can retry if I think that this was just a mistake. I can reset if I want to do that, or I can go view diagnostics. This gives me insight into the file system. I can go get event logs and information that might help me understand what happened. And once I've fixed it, then I could retry it again, reset, and start over. Right, but that is white glove, and wanted to walk you through that process. Now, troubleshooting is really interesting with Intune. We've got a lot of things that have been added to help us troubleshoot scenarios that could happen with Intune since this was first introduced. So I want to break this into a couple of phases. The first is the device import, right? So that's where I would go into the portal and I would load the Excel file, the CSV file that contains a list of all of my devices that I want to register with the Autopilot service, right? When you do that, there are some problems that you might come across. And so these are all documented here under the Add Profile to Devices documentation. But I show them to you here, and really nice to be able to have this interpretation so that you can figure out pretty quickly what's going on, right? So one of the things, WADP003, I called that out because there is a maximum allowed of 1,000 items per CSV. So if you have more than 1,000, you'll want to split your CSV into multiple CSVs. But really good job of kind of calling out what the specific errors are, even including devices already registered, right, in your organization kind of thing. So the device import, you might run into some errors there. This one I actually did run into devices already registered because I'd actually deleted it. I'm doing the same testing with my device, sorry, I have the same device set that I'm doing the testing against again and again, and during an import, I ran into that particular issue. It was very helpful to help me see what was going on. Still on troubleshooting. So once you get the autopilot process in flow, or once the autopilot process begins, there's two phases. There's the out-of-box experience phase where you could run into some issues. There's also the running OS phase where you might want to reflect back and see, hey, why is something not happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So during the out-of-box experience, you do have the ability to use a tool called MDM Diagnostics tool to get a dump of what's happened that you can then review and kind of reflect on to see what's happening there. So I want to show that to you in just a minute. Also in the registry on devices, once you're in the running OS, we introduced a registry area that you can look at to troubleshoot Autopilot starting in Windows 10 1709. Added to that in Windows 10 1803. So in 1803, we added event log entries. You can also go into the settings app to see how things work and so forth. So let me actually go back to one of my machines that's in the UBI phase. Let me pull that in. So let's just take this at the first screen. Certainly at this stage, you won't have had any problems at all yet, but just as an example, I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift F10, and what we can do is run MDM diagnostic tool, and area would be Autopilot TPM, and I'm going to output that to a cab. And so I'll probably have an error along the way here because this is a VM, and we are very early in the process of this too. But let's see, I misspelled that, I'm sure. Yeah, I forgot an S, my bad. Try that again. So it's going to go collect the information, put it out to a cab file. You can take that cab file and be able to see some detail about what's actually going on with the machine and so forth. That's the error that I expected. So we'll move on, and it's going to go grab the TPM certs and different things, right? So then it will ultimately produce a cab file. I can use that cab file, collect it, and move on. Right? So that's one way in the out-of-box experience where you can actually troubleshoot what's happening. Now, once you get into the running operating system, let's go look specifically at that. So here, pulling back in, this is the user-driven approach that I had. So let's look first at the registry. So if I go into the registry editor, actually go in here. All right, and then move down to local machine. All right, and then software, and then Microsoft, and then provisioning. So I'll just type a P, so we'll jump down to provisioning here. All right, and then under provisioning, we have diagnostics provider. Okay, Autopilot. And so we have all of these different pieces in Autopilot that we can kind of look and see what's going on, and configurations and different things that could be of interest. So we have that. We have some CSPs up here, as you can see, right? Different things related that can help you. There's also other troubleshooting stuff in here just for Intune that I won't go into, and so forth. Then finally, if we go into the event log, okay, event viewer. All right, and applications and services logs. Let that expand for just a minute. And then under there, we will go to Microsoft as soon as it comes up. Microsoft, Windows, here. And then provisioning diagnostics provider. I'll go to P. So down here, provisioning diagnostics provider, if I can say that. Provisioning, there we go, diagnostics provider. Then we have our event logs here, Autopilot, and we can see the various events of different things that might be interesting with Autopilot, right? Again, the registry was added in Windows 10 1709. The event log was added in Windows 10 1803. And then one last section while we're in here. If I go into settings, one other thing that I can do is go under accounts. So I Access Worker School. Here I'm connected, going to info. And so I can see all the areas that I'm getting managed by Intune, right? Applications that have been installed. But if I scroll on down, I can create an advanced diagnostics report. So I'm going to export that. Users public documents. Okay, so I'm going to export that. Here it is. Just open it up by clicking on it, brings it up in a browser, and you can see some really interesting information about this machine, including certificates that have been issued. Here's the trusted root cert that I put on the machine through Intune, different other details, provisioning details, policies that are managed, and so forth. So that becomes very, very useful to be able to troubleshoot what's actually happening or not happening with Intune, right? Okay. If you want additional resources, here are some good links to help you understand how to troubleshoot profiles and Autopilot in general and different things, okay? All right, so starting into some tips and tricks. So the first one that I want to talk about is the enrollment status page. So you've seen the enrollment status page in several of the demos pop up. We've talked about it already. You know, the enrollment status page has a number of things that will benefit you as the admin. Also, it benefits the user. The user will see the enrollment status page and know things are still in progress, in flight for configuring. You as the admin can see the enrollment status page and know how things are working, is how they should work, etc. So it is recommended to have it. The enrollment status page will reflect the configurations that are coming down. As you configure it in Intune, you can configure portions of settings and so forth to apply to devices. Other settings and so forth will apply to users. The enrollment status page tracks all of that. For those settings that apply to the user, right? In especially the hybrid 80 join scenario, you could run into a situation where you're starting to see timeouts because those policies aren't delivered within the configured interval at which they should. And when I say the configured interval, pull back in Intune and we'll show the enrollment status page. Windows enrollment, and then go to enrollment status page, and we'll see the various settings. One of them is show an error after a specified number of minutes. So the default is 60 minutes. You can change that, but in the case of user policy, it may not really matter, right? There's just some processing that has to happen on the way hybrid 80 join comes in that you still may see a timeout, right? So one of the ways that you can work with this and still enable the enrollment status page is to use this configuration service provider. This is not exposed in the Intune UI, so you will have to use the custom setting whenever you create a policy. And here's just a suggested way to set it up. So you want to name the policy, skip user status page, you can do whatever you like if you don't like that name, a description if you like, and then the OMA URI is right here. This is case sensitive, so always be aware of that. Boolean, and set it to true so that in the user portion of the status page actually gets bypassed. That would help you avoid the timeout scenarios and such. So a few more tips and tricks here. The first one, Autopilot reset. So this I struggled with. I was going to make this a demo during this, but it's harder to do with a virtual machine, so I decided just to kind of tell you about it. What this is it's really designed to help you get into a Windows recovery environment whenever you have devices that are able to do that. It requires Windows 10 1709 or better. Basically, it's going to allow your IT admins, your teachers, if you're in a school situation, to the ability to quickly remove personal files, apps, settings, basically reset the Windows 10 device from the lock screen anytime, and through Autopilot apply original settings and so forth back to the machine, right? That's what it's designed to do. It's a really cool thing that you can do. You can enable this through a couple of ways. One, you can enable it with a custom URI setting. So this is where you configure it. This is the custom URI. The data type would be integer. The value you can set accordingly to handle that, right? So that's a way to do it. You can also provision it with Windows Configuration Designer and so forth. All right. When you get that setting configured, you will need to deploy it. And so the idea would be that you could deploy it to any group. And you maybe use all users and devices. If you want to deploy it just to those devices that are autopiloted, you can create a group containing the ZTD ID. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But then that would be just all devices that are autopilot registered. You could do other groups as you desire, whatever makes sense. Once you have that configured, it's really easy to trigger it from the lock screen. Just a control plus the Windows key plus R will actually activate that, so you can step through the process. One of the other things I mentioned through here, first, default provisioning profile. So you saw me in 4 different scenarios have 4 different provisioning profiles. There is a way that you can choose which provisioning profile will be the default one in that screen. So just be aware of that. If you do have a provisioning profile should be used most of the time, it'll save you a few steps hooking things up. You also saw as we went through the computer naming template. So what this does is you can accommodate, a couple of things. You can accommodate computer naming through scripting in Intune or ConfigMgr. If you have ConfigMgr agent installed, co-management, whatever, you can do that. It would be a renaming of the PC after it already has the mini-NT kind of name or the default factory name during the build process, or you can leverage the apply computer name template. That is part of the provisioning profile. Basically, you saw that. You can select yes to enable it. And what it does is it gives you a template that you can use. The names must be 15 characters or less, just like you would expect. Have letters, numbers, hyphens. You can't have names that are all numbers, right? So basically, you will give it the beginning or the template, if you will, and then there will be a portion of the name that will be filled in by random strings of numbers and characters and so on. Okay, so just put it in Notepad here as an example. So here, the first one, %serial, %macro, what that's going to do is add a hardware-specific serial number, or you can use the second one, %rand:(x %macro. So what that's going to do is basically add a random string of numbers where x equals the number of digits to add, right? So there's more detail around that you might want to dig into if that's something of interest to you, right? Okay. And then avoid setup when autopilot is not available. This one's interesting. So there is a setting in the autopilot profile called hide change account options that keeps the user from creating a local account. If the user skips the screen to connect to the network, then the autopilot profile is not received, so they can still get around it. But in Windows 10, installed in S mode, there is a setting where they can't skip the network connection at all. So in that case, they can't skip autopilot either, right? That's a little bit complicated to say, so let me say it again. In autopilot, there is a profile setting called hide change account options, and that specifically will keep the user from creating local accounts. But if the user skips around that screen and is able to connect to the network, then the autopilot profile is still going to be received and you can move on. If you're using Windows 10 installed in S mode, then there is the ability to say that you can't skip the network connection. So effectively, you can block continuing with autopilot if autopilot is not available, right? That is one thing to at least be aware could happen. Whenever the system first comes up, it will go check with the autopilot service, check to see if there's a profile. If there is no profile, then it will just go through regular setup mode. If you want to prevent that, then doing what I just talked about is an option, right? In terms of proxy settings and concerns with that, with autopilot, then the recommendation is to use a WPAD service where the device can automatically detect proxy settings. If you don't have that, it's required to open up most of the URLs in order to get the proxy details to the machine. Right? Managing the default administrator account. So by default, the local administrator account will not be enabled. There are settings that you can bring to bear, CSPs and such, that you can bring to bear to create another account or even to activate the administrator account. but then you have to manage that account going forward. If the device is joined to Azure AD, then all the tenant admins are going to automatically be admins of the device joined to Azure AD. So that could be an option too for helping manage the local administrator account. And then GPO versus MDM settings. I hear this question sometimes. Who wins? If you have multiple, or if you have the same setting trying to be applied by both, who wins? So there was a new MDM policy setting to indicate that MDM settings should always win. It's not 100% effective. The diagnostics, can't say that. The diagnostics page that I showed you is helpful in this case to really understand what's happening and what's actually applying. But the general rule of thumb is choose one or the other. Right? Yeah, there will be a period of migration that you need to remove the GPOs and go the MDM route, but that's another conversation that comes up sometimes is what is the direction that should be pursued, GPO or MDM? And that's a whole long discussion perhaps, but in simple form, we're becoming more and more of a mobile society. Our users are more and more mobile. If you are relying on GPO today, you have to understand that you cannot get those GPO settings applied unless a user connects to the network. Whereas if you have a user or device managed by MDM, as long as they have an internet connection, then those settings can come down. So really weigh that, right? And the prioritization really these days is MDM for that reason. And there's tools that we have that will help you identify GPO settings that are in your environment and translate those over to MDM, etc. Now, in terms of group deployment and configuration strategy, right? What is the idea here, or idea here? What is the direction here? The topic of how to best create a group structure to support staged deployments in an organization is pretty complex, really beyond the scope of our current discussion. One specific Autopilot example revolves around how to ensure base settings are targeted to all devices that are imported and Autopilot ready. The approach really is hinged on using an attribute called ZTD-ID. And I'll show that to you in a minute, and building a group based on that. The ZTD-ID is unique to Autopilot devices. When you import that device into the Autopilot service, it will be assigned to ZTD-ID. So if we can grab those details and put them in a group, then we can plan to Autopilot whatever devices we need to when they come into our environment, right? License troubleshooting, also want to talk about for a minute. So if you have a user signing into a device during Autopilot, that stage where they type in their username and then password, and that user does not have an Intune license assigned, you're going to have some failures, right? You can troubleshoot licensing issues using tools like licensingdiag.exe. So take a look at that if that is of interest and or concern to you, right? Okay, so I have a couple of things that I want to demo. And one of them, I talked about Autopilot Reset. Really not going to demo that one, but I do want to point you to really good documentation on it. So here is an article about how to set up resetting devices with Autopilot Reset. If I scroll down a bit here, you'll see the lock screen and the idea from the lock screen, be able to hit Control plus the Windows key plus R, open up a command prompt you can go through, open up the prompt you can go through and basically reset the device. So that's a really good option for you if you need that capability to be able to do things like really thought about more in a school scenario, be able to go back and reset devices and so forth. Right, the computer name option, I talked about that. I do want to show that option to you again. So let me pull back into and focused in on that page. And so my setting is to not use the apply computer name template, but notice if I click yes, I have some additional detail that I need to add here. So create a unique name for your devices, use that, gives you an example, right, of how you can do that. There's good documentation about it. If you just search on apply computer name template, you'll find some good documentation on it. But this is what we have today. Instead of giving a random computer name, you can at least have some predictability in your computer names that you will use whenever the device is autopiloted. So I wanted to show that to you specifically. And then in terms of MDM settings, right, we talked about that a bit already. I already showed that to you, so you can go in and look at the diagnostics report and export that, be able to sift through it in just an HTML and see what's actually happening with Intune. Now, one other thing that I want to show you is this thing that I referenced above in terms of group deployment configurations and so on. I talked about this thing called a ZTD ID. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Let me bring the console in just as a reminder and show this to you. So here back in Intune, if I scroll back to the left and then go down to groups, so we'll be able to see it. First, what is a ZTD ID? Again, already stated, but we've been going a long time here, so just want to bring that back to memory. A ZTD ID specifically is a type of ID that is assigned to a device whenever it is imported into the Autopilot service. So if we can use a group to tag the all systems that have a ZTD ID, we will know which ones are eligible for being autopiloted. And so here in my groups, I can go and create a new group, right? No problem. What I would do here is give it a group type of security and then membership type of dynamic device, whatever. And then I would specify my dynamic query and go that route. But I already have one created, so let me just use that for demo. So here's my Autopilot devices with a ZTD ID. So I have a number of devices in Autopilot. Not all of them have the ZTD ID associated because I've not told Intune to go automatically do that for all of my devices. Plus there's some Android devices here in my tenant as well as iOS, which won't have a ZTD ID. So here, my dynamic membership rule, you will see this tag that any device containing the ZTD ID. If I look at the advanced rule, this is the way to configure it. So the device.device physical IDs, any of them that contain a ZTD ID. And so that goes out to Azure AD and looks in your tenant and will return back the members. So you've already seen this view. So I've shown you, sometimes you will represent by the actual hardware ID. Sometimes if you have the actual name, it will show here. So two of mine are just the hardware ID and one of them is the name. But by having this ability, you can know that the devices that you have imported into Autopilot, you can actually see them here and correlate and know things will work. So very, very useful information for your organization if you're going to be using Autopilot. Now, again, some organizations may just simply create a group of devices with the ZTD ID and use that to target deployment profiles. If you're going to only use one type of deployment profile, that's a great way to do it. In my case, I have the group for the ZTD ID, and then I have 4 or 3 additional groups because I have 3 additional deployment profiles that I demoed through this. But either way, if that helps your organization, most of the time it will, then that information is useful to know. Okay. And that, after a long bit of talking about Autopilot, wraps up our session for today. So thanks for hanging in there with me, and we will see you next time.